It's 2:30, so I think we can get started. All right. I'm sure people will drop in as they come, and if you aren't muted when you come in, please do mute yourself. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are very, very excited to have another session on ethnography and the importance and value of ethnographic methods for researching supply chain management phenomena. And this webinar is part of the special issue on qualitative novel ways of doing qualitative research in supply chain management. It's a developmental initiative. And we had already one webinar on ethnography, and that really met great resonance. And there were a lot of open questions left unanswered. So we decided to do another one with an absolute expert in the field, Lorenzo Skade. We are very, very excited to have him today. So the seminar today is a little bit different, or the webinar today is a little bit different than usual. We have first an input by Lorenzo, and he will actually address sort of the questions that remain unanswered in the first webinar on ethnography. And then we have 4 pitches with people presenting their ideas, their proposals, and Lorenzo and possibly some of the guest editors, depending a little bit on timing, will give ad hoc feedback on these pitches. And the focus today is more on sort of the methodological feasibility and novelty of these pitches. If you click now once, Victoria. Before we get started, just a short reminder that we have another webinar coming up, one more scheduled for now on this Friday. It's a deep dive and also with pitches into discourse studies. So make sure to register if you haven't done so, and if you're interested in the topic. And then we have the conferences coming up in July and August, and there's also still time to submit proposals for both Euroma and AOM. So please think about that if you join these conferences and want to talk to us there. Okay, now if you click once more. So as said, we have first some input and then the pitches, and the speaker of today is Lorenzo Skade. Lorenzo is currently a postdoc in management and organization at Viadrina, right? Is it Viadrina? I always say it wrong. I don't see you right now, Lorenzo, but
Yes,
correct me.
yes, it's correct.
At the European University Viadrina, Frankfurt, Germany. He has a PhD also from the same university, and is generally interested in, I think, broadly speaking, temporality, strategy as practice theory, and disruptive innovation as well. That's how we know each other. And is doing very, very interesting ethnographic fieldwork at the moment. So I think we'll learn a little bit about that in a second. So I would say we get started just to waste no time. We already talked about the meeting being recorded up till Lorenzo and the rest being cut out later on. But I would just, if you click once more, give the floor now to Lorenzo. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Julia, for the very nice introduction. And thanks to the guest editors for inviting me to talking about ethnographic research. It's something that I really love on doing. And so I'm very happy to talk about this. As you've heard, I'm studying mostly issues of innovation and temporality. So my research is not necessarily in the context of supply chain management. And therefore, I kept my insights from today rather on a practical level, because I want to provide you just with some practicalities of ethnographic research, of some of the things that I've learned, and maybe also some things that I wished someone would have told me before doing my first projects. If we get to the next slide. So when I started out with my first ethnographic project, that was in 2018 during the PhD, I was studying a startup accelerator. And what I expected on studying was like an organization where a lot of things are happening, where entrepreneurs and manager and staff of the accelerator are very busy all the time, working on innovation and so on and so forth. And if you go to the next slide, you can just see that's like from a commercial website. Therefore, I'm using this picture. This was actually what I found, like an office, like an open office, a lot of young people working together, very energetic. And this is what I actually thought I was studying. As I got to know the context, I learned through our insights and working with these entrepreneurs and seeing what they're doing that there is a hectic, very dynamic thing to this, but there are also other things are happening at the same time. Interestingly, this organization brought in two artists who were supposed to work with the entrepreneurs to capture, all the dynamics that are going on. And if you click one page further, this is what the artists then draw. It's a bit of hard to see. That's on the right-hand side. The artists were drawing most of the time sleeping people. Not because they were not busy with their ideas, but they were so tired all of the time. They were under huge time pressure. And the artists were also a bit confused like me because they thought they were, working together with these young dynamic entrepreneurs. And now people were sleeping all the time. So, and from that on, we worked like on the concept of acceleration, of what it really means to speed up time, and also, as we can see here, what happens at the same time, and that sometimes you also have to decelerate time and to stop time and to take time breaks. And this was an interesting insight that I got from ethnographic research. What I want to talk to you about today, if you click one page further, I think the main message for me actually is to remain very pragmatic. That's an answer to a lot of the questions that I saw from the last session, and I'm very pragmatic in the way. And this is how I address some of the questions that you also have. I think it's important to remaining pragmatic when it comes up, where you are on your onto epistemological standing in a way of how do you want to conduct an ethnography? It's not always possible to really spend, longer times with your participants. Sometimes it's just observation of meetings, and therefore you have to shift, your initial plans. I think you have to remain pragmatic in a way when it comes up to your theorizing. You might have some, sensing concept in mind, some, theoretical concept that you want to test, so on and so forth. But over time, they may also shift while you study some of your context. And yeah, I would argue that's very important to remain open. And some of the things, I will come to this, we talk about more practical stuff. I think it's important to remain pragmatic and open when it comes up to opportunities that the field presents to you, so that you're also open to some of the surprising findings that are in the field. So that's the overall message, so to say, of this short talk from today. I first like to start because it was one question that came up that's on the next slide with regards to getting access and also maintaining access. I would argue I took over this idea from some of the authors that are listed here, and I think it's important to keep in mind that access as such is not a single event. I think of access as being rather like a process because I like this idea by Martha Feldman and others that, it's not a single door that you open and then you are in the organization, but it's like, you have to think rather of a hallway with multiple doors, and some doors, might remain closed, others may open along the way. And also here you have to remain pragmatic, right? Sometimes some of the people are not willing to open the doors to talking to you, but this might also help you to, open other doors. So therefore, it's like a process. It's not like one door opens and you don't have any other chance of going somewhere else. Secondly, what I think is quite important to keep in mind is what are your research partners interested in, right? Because for us researchers, we think about, scientific knowledge that we generate or data in the first place, but it's not necessarily what your research partners are interested in because, your papers might take some time to be published. And by the way, by the time they are published, that many people of the field might have moved along. So for them, it's quite interesting to see what you can offer to them. So I often talk to my research partners and discuss, what can we do in terms of reflection sessions throughout the projects, right? Is there anything I can contribute in terms of giving small talks about topics that I might have knowledge about? Is there something that I can feed back to them in terms of my insights that I have? And I sometimes very general insights, and again, not so much interested in how your insight extends some theory, but they are more interested in what do you observe of their daily work. I think that's particularly important because these projects they require substantial time investment. I think my first project I was involved for 2 years. The current project I'm doing now in military innovation unit that has been going on for a couple of years. So that's a huge time investment and people, give to huge time investment people make and they provide to you. That's for you on the one hand, but also for them. Um, and what has been helpful in that way to me is that I sometimes use like something like a foot in the door strategy, right? I think it's very tough to pitch an ethnographic project of 1 year to someone, and someone might not have been in touch with ethnographers so far. But maybe trying out, 3 months and see what comes up, and then you can talk. Maybe you want to extend the project, maybe you want to go in another direction. So a bit of foot in the door might be helpful rather than pitching like a 2 years ethnography. That might be very hard to sell if you're not a senior researcher with like a big network. And then finally, what I like, the notion it's in a recent paper, it's about, it's not only access in the field, but also dancing with the field, which means you have to remain flexible. As I said, I think it's a good resource to look up to because the colleagues talk about, you sometimes have to negotiate your access again and again, especially if you are in contexts with like high security standards. Um, where some spontaneous opportunities come along, so on and so forth. So this continues to be like an obstacle that you have to negotiate with your research partners. If we go to the next slide, I think, yeah, um, what's important as well, because there were a couple of questions that came up, is the question of whose reality are you presenting in your research, right? And again, I think it depends on your research question and it depends on your access and who you talk to. But here's just a couple of things to keep in mind that I find helpful. So I think it's helpful if you reflect on your prior experiences and also your assumptions about the field in your field notes ongoingly. So I had some prior assumptions about the military that I had before I started working with them. And I think it's quite important to remain reflective about it because it, of course, it impacts who you talk to, and how you kind of, what findings you kind of present in the end. And there might be some like very simple questions that you have around this that you can address in interviews with your participants, right? It doesn't always have to be like about these big questions, but questions like, okay, why did you do such and such? And I would always think about you doing this and this. And people are quite open to talking about, what they're doing, and I think that's really helpful. This is where the insights come from. And also thinking about like your emergent insights, you don't have to present the final paper to them, but what are some insights that you find interesting that could be interesting to them? Presenting them, discussing them. Of course, you won't present like private topics or other things, secure things that you have gained access to. But like, what are some interesting stuff that you thought that you saw in the field? And this can really help you to have some discussions with them. Fourth, I think there are different ways. I won't go into this. If you read, like in the literature on ethnography, of presenting different voices. So, is it the voice of the researcher? Is it the voice of the participant? And I think it's really helpful to read what others have wrote about, or how others just present their research. And I think it's just also sometimes a question of how we present different voices. And finally, I believe, I strongly believe it's not about, revealing like there's this one truth and we just have to find this one person who has this one truth. I think the power of ethnography is that it reveals multiple realities of multiple persons who are in the field, and they're all important to give voice to. And this is something just that I have to keep in mind. If you're looking for the truth, might we all see the world differently? And like the power of ethnography is to kind of showcase these differences. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and just addressing finally like some personal and ethical challenges that might come along the way. Because I saw the question of, how do you impact the field? I think, first of all, I think you do impact the field in any way, and we'll come to this in a second. But I think, first of all, before you start your project, you also have to, you ask yourself how close do you actually want to, go to the field, and where are your personal boundaries? Do you want to spend, are you open to spending also some time after work with your participant? Are you, I don't know, living there, staying there some time, or is it just that you're observing strategy meeting and go home and so forth? And it's important also to, also to draw your boundaries, I think. But nevertheless, ethnographic research is about trust building, right? So I always, ask myself, what kind of person would I trust with all these insights? And you should not forget you get such immense insights into the professional, but also the private life of people, right? People, you get to know people, I don't know, going through problems in a private life, on their job place, so on and so forth. So I think it really takes trust and also you sharing. But again, this depends where your boundaries are. But I also would only trust the person when I feel that they're also open to me. And this is, I think, how you create this trust. Um, and again, I think there are a lot of, ethical questions around privacy, trust, secrecy, loyalty. All of these came up. And I think there's no one answer to all of them. I think it really takes careful judgment and, a decision, case by case decision throughout the research process. And it helps to talking to people who have gone through this process. It talks to sometimes asking, the participants about questions of secrecy, so on and so forth. But just generally speaking, what I would never do, I would never share like your raw field notes. Sometimes you're tempted, and some people are very interested in what you're writing, so on and so forth. But never share these notes, right? You can be open as you want in your notes with yourself, but never share those because these are your unfiltered notes. And sometimes, and it's just like a side note, sometimes people will also test you for these things, I feel. Some people will test you how much they can trust you, right? And ask you, oh, what did person so and so tell you in this meeting or in your private meeting and so forth. And I think that sometimes, they want to test, can they really trust you with these private information that they're providing to you? And I think I think it's important to be loyal then. And only by this you will establish some trust. But then again, I think it's open to discuss and share some, some interpretations and some insights. And it also helps to build trust because I think we all want to be understood in what we're doing. And people, I think the people that I met in my project, they really generally love their work and they love to, talking about their work. And a final word with regard to ethical approvals, because I think that comes up, especially nowadays, a lot of the time. And because I don't have any, the process in Germany looks differently, so I don't want to make any general statements with regard to this, but I think it's very important that you check with like an experienced mentor at your university or on your network, an experienced ethnography, because if you are conducting any, it doesn't have to be a full-blown ethnography, even if it's just ethnographic observations. I believe there will always be situations that you have not planned for, like people inviting you to dinner afterwards and so on and so forth. And I think you really want to talk to someone who knows about how this approval process works in your university, of how to address these issues, of how to, write these ethical approval applications and so on and so forth. Um, Depending on what you expect this project to look like, but I think it's very important to keep in mind that there will be many situations actually, and it's depending on the field which you are in. I, for example, if I'm in an organization, there are a lot of people, public person that come in and out, other people of the university, and you cannot always go around and tell everyone, I'm an ethnographer, I'm collecting data here, right? It's very tough. So I think it's very important to keep in mind and to check with someone who went through this process successfully. And then finally, I think that's already my final slide. If we go click one further. No, it's not. Okay. Let me, finally, what's important, I think, to keep in mind is that conducting this sort of research is really most of the time deeply personal and it's an emotional roller coaster because we often study topics that either, align with our personal interests that are very important to ourselves and so forth. And there's a lot of things written about it. But I feel like a first step, it's already helpful to saying, just because you go through some emotions, because you go through some, fear or some excitement or all of these emotions, I think it's normal because it's not a desk research. It's you're on the field and you're talking to other human beings, and it's sometimes very deeply personal and sometimes stressful. So I would urge you to remain as open as possible to opportunities to also to talking to others, but only as possible as you are able to be. Sometimes if you are very, you know, um, researching vulnerable contexts and so on and so forth, you sometimes have to really set your own boundaries. And therefore, it's important to reflect and also to share your experiences and also maybe, to write down how your perspective shifts over time as you become more familiar in the field. That's something that I found quite interesting. And you might want to seek out for mentors or form support groups with other early career scholars, connect with other ethnographers. Depending on the field you are, family and friends might also not be the best people to share some of your insights with. Because sometimes it's very helpful to get to know other people who also went through this process because you might also learn a lot of secret stuff that you cannot share with anyone, and only people who have also gone through this whole process will be able to relate to you. So that being said, I think my final slide is this one. Is saying I think it's important to think about what's happening in the front stage, what we see, but ethnographic process or research also allows us to get in the process of studying what's happening in the backstage of supply chains to really understand, what are people doing and not only what they say they do, but also what they actually do. And therefore, I think it's quite important and enriching. Thank you for your attention.
All right. Thank you very much for a very, very interesting and insightful presentation, Lorenzo. I would open the floor now to questions, and we don't have any in the chat, but if anybody has one, they can speak up directly if they want to. And if not, then I have multiple questions. So let me just have a look. I actually don't see anybody, so I don't know if people have questions. But yeah, you can just speak up, or I think there's also the function to lift your hand in some kind of way. So feel free to just interrupt and ask your questions to Lorenzo. Okay, there is actually one. Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
Am I
Hi.
audible?
Hello, we can hear you.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
perfect.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. Thank you, Lorenzo. So, uh, actually, I had a question regarding whether if I have a collaborator who is working in any industry, so whether I can position that as an ethnographic research, because I am working as a full-time assistant professor at a university. I cannot go to a field for such a long duration. So does this qualify? So suppose I have a part-time PhD student, does it qualify as ethnographic research? What are the boundary conditions?
Yeah, thanks for your question. So it does. So just that I understood correctly, you have someone who's working in the field and who's like actually part of the field and who's thinking about collecting data in the field, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, so again, I think that first of all, that anything is possible that you to collaborate also with people with people in the field. I can guide you through some resources with regard to these sorts of collaborations. I think it's just important to, so in the first place, it's important to be open about, what's your role in the field, what's the role of your collaborators in the field, right? If you collect some data because they have access to data that others will not have. but they might not be identifiable as researchers by others in the way they had. So I think it very much depends on how they collect data and what kind of data they collect. So I think you have to make sure that it's always that there's a division between, this is the part that's their work part, and the other thing is where they collect data in, right? That's for ethical reasons, something that you have to make sure that it's, you don't have someone who's working in the field and just by accident collecting all the data. I think it's then very necessary that someone like you is then also outside of the field to reflect on some insights. I think it can be tough, actually, if you do an ethnographic research, if you're like deeply immersed in the field, so to say, but I won't say it's impossible.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. We have two more questions, Emma
Yeah,
and Soya. However, I just realized we're also a little bit tight on time. So
I will
Emma,
be very quick.
okay, maybe you answer Soya's question in the chat, which is how about using ethnographic methods in a mixed methods research? Is it welcome by chance? Very quickly. And then maybe, Emma, we can sort of combine yours with your talk in a second, just to make sure that the pitches have enough time. So quick response to that one, and then we move on to the pitches.
So maybe someone wants to jump in from the guest editor because I don't have any experience with using ethnographic method with mixed methods. Does anyone of the guest editors have
I don't
experience?
have experience either. My hunch would be that per se it's probably okay because mixed methods, I mean, ethnographic research is qualitative research, and therefore I think it qualifies. But it's certainly also something I would have to think about a bit more. But yeah, I don't think per se that it would be a problem.
I can also reply a bit in the chat
Yeah, okay.
to save
Then
time, okay?
Then let's move on. Sorry, actually, for inviting to all the questions and then saying we don't have any time for that. But we do have to move on because now the pitches come and they're obviously the hard bit of today.